I've always been slightly fascinated by the Zeiss Contax II. It won't come as much of a surprise, as Zeiss produced this clunky-looking camera as a direct competitor to the Leica III, one of my favourite vintage rangefinders. The Leica was the first commercially released 35mm rangefinder, and would take the world by storm in the early 20th century. German optics manufacturer Zeiss wanted in on the action, so set out designing a 35mm that would compete with the Leica, initially releasing the first Zeiss Contax in 1932. It was very expensive and rather unreliable, so did not sell very well. In 1936, the Leica III was the camera. Zeiss went back to the drawing board with the Contax II, redesigning it to trump some of the Leica III's perceived shortcomings. Whilst the Leica had two separate windows for its rangefinder and viewfinder, meaning you had to focus in one window and then compose in the other, the new Contax II would be the first camera to have a combined rangefinder and viewfinder, allowing you to focus and compose simultaneously. On top of that, the effective base length of the rangefinder would be greatly increased to allow for more accurate focusing of faster or longer lenses. Zeiss also designed a clever metal garage door shutter that travelled vertically rather than horizontally. Because of the smaller distance of travel, the Contax II squeezed out a top speed of 1/1250th, trumping the Leica III's top speed of 1/1000th. They also managed to fit all the speeds on a single dial, from the slowest right up to the fastest, whilst the Leica has a separate dial for slower speeds. The Contax III, which was released alongside the Contax II, also featured a built-in light meter, another first for any camera. The convenience of these improvements, coupled with the large number of superb lenses made for the system, meant sales were very successful despite the retail price actually being slightly more expensive than the Leica. So, with the history lesson out of the way, I've always fancied adding a Contax II to my collection, mainly I think because of their historical importance, but also because of the raft of decent glass available for the system. These are old cameras, but they're usable cameras. Another huge plus is the price. I've always been staggered by how cheaply you can pick up a Barnack Leica compared to the current Leica M prices. Well, a Contax II is even cheaper still. I finally jumped when I found this early 1937 pre-war Contax II in what is pretty much mint condition. It's mounted with a 1937 50mm f2 sonar, which is optically mint too. I plan on reviewing this against my Leica Scimitar soon. The price for this original condition camera and case? £190. Bonkers, isn't it? Especially when you consider it would have cost the equivalent of about £3,500 in 1937. Whilst I'm certainly not a Leica fanboy, and like to judge each camera on its own merit, it's difficult for me not to compare the Contax II to my Leica III. After all, one was designed to trump the other. After my initial tests, I think the take-home message is that you can't make an improvement without also making a sacrifice. From a design perspective, the Contax is a bit of an ugly duckling. With its sharp square corners, it feels more cumbersome in the hands than the sleek curved Leica body. The improvement here is that the entire back film door of the Contax is removable, which makes loading film a breeze. The Leica must be loaded from the base, which can be a real bitch if you're not concentrating. So the Contax is easier to load, but the sacrifice is that it feels a little less solid than the Leica. There's just a tiny bit of give in that film door when you squeeze the camera in your hand, whilst the Leica just feels like a solid lump. I like how the collapsible 50mm lenses are recessed into the camera body of the Contax. Once extended, the lens is still very low profile and fits the overall aesthetic look of the camera. I've always thought that the extended lenses stick out a little too far on the Leica and look a little awkward. The drawback with the Contax lens system is that the whole lens turns when you focus. That means that sometimes you get caught looking around every angle of the lens trying to determine what your aperture is set to, a problem that you won't find on the Leica. I do prefer the combined rangefinder and viewfinder on the Contax. It's nicer having it all in one place. Although I must say, you soon adjust to the Leica's split finder, but the Leica does have an adjustable diopter, which is quite nice. Whilst I've never had a problem focusing my 50mm f2 on my Leica III, I could see the benefit of the Contax's impressive rangefinder base length for those wanting to use faster or longer lenses. The sacrifice here is that the rangefinder patch sits naturally where your right hand wants to go, so you have to adjust your grip to this awkward claw shape in order not to get it in the way. I rarely use speed slower than 1/60th, so really don't feel it's a deal breaker that speed slower than 1/30th must be selected using a separate dial on the Leica. It's nice that they fit all the speeds on one dial on the Contax, but the dial is larger with a longer throw to advance the film, which slows down shooting speeds. The Contax's top speed of 1/1250th over the Leica's 1/1000th really means very little, but the sacrifice in having the metal garage door shutter is the noise. It's sort of a solid thud, rather than that reassuring silent little click you get from the Leica. Not a deal breaker, but it adds to the feeling of the Leica just being a smidge better engineered. And it is. Everything just feels a little bit nicer on the Leica. I get the feeling that the perceived issues with the Leica that Zeiss set out to trump were never really issues at all, and that it was really just a bit of marketing spin so Zeiss could get their share of the pie. That said, the Contax II is undoubtedly a brilliant camera, capable of taking brilliant pictures. I feel lucky to have this 84-year-old camera that is usable, but is also so capable. They are also so cheap right now that you'd be nuts not to pick one up. If £200 is out of your budget, then look for an early Soviet Kiev camera. It's the same thing, made with the same tools, and in some instances by the very same workers, just in the Soviet Union rather than in Dresden.